So, John, what is the Bible? The Bible, my friends, is a book. It's right here on my shelf. The Bible. But what is the Bible? The Bible is a collection of writings. It's a collection of stories. The first part of the Bible is the Old Testament. That's part of the Jewish stories, the Torah. That part of the Bible is from the Jewish traditions. And then we get to the New Testament, where you hear Joshua on a regular basis negating the Jewish traditions. And in the New Testament, there's so many stories and tales of him negating those traditions, and yet it also says he's there to fulfill the law and to command you to follow the Ten Commandments. It basically is saying that you need to follow the Jewish law. You have to remember that during that time period in history, there were many different sects of Judaism. Many, many different sects of Judaism. And some of them were more militant than others, and some of them were not as militant. And some of them were more extreme, and some of them were not. And some of the more extreme ones really were looking at their culture and their time, and they were trying to find ways to come into power so that their way of thinking, their belief, could be the ruling authority. And so they were finding ways to create themselves or their thoughts and their beliefs as the right way. And so when you look at the specifically the New Testament, you're looking at writings that were written by Judaic sects that were trying to prove a messianic belief. The belief in a Messiah. I have a very distinct memory of Joshua turning down being a Messiah. They wanted him to be a Messiah. They wanted him to step into the role of fulfilling the Judaic law, and he wouldn't do it. And he walked away from the groups that asked him to do that because it wasn't what he wanted to do. It wasn't his path, right? He didn't believe in it because he didn't believe in just Judaic law. He believed that people of all faiths and all traditions came to the source, came to God. And, if you're loving, if you're a caring person, if you're kind, you've found God. And that was really his belief. But the books, the Bible itself, starts out with the sects trying to make him a Messiah. Now, is there truth in some of the books? Absolutely. The phrase "God is love" doesn't fit in with a lot of the other parts of the book. And when you really go into the stories and look at the stories and you come at it from the perspective of what is loving in this statement, you can find beautiful truths in the Bible. But the Bible started off flawed because the Judaic sects were trying to prove their Judaism as the only way, as the way it was going to be. Then it was translated. And it's interesting because I hear people reference the Aramaic Gospels and stuff like that. And the Aramaic Gospels were translated from Greek. So most people think that the Aramaic Gospels are the original writings. They're not. They're translated from Greek. And when you look at the Bible, it's been translated from Greek and Roman and German and English and French and Spanish. And every time that it gets translated, there's nuance that gets changed. Because in some cultures, certain words mean certain things. Some cultures, some languages are more conceptual than literal. And it's that translation I talk about the Life is suffering in Buddhism. When you translate it correctly to English, it's life is suffering because of our habitual response to our subconscious belief. Because the word dukkha has three separate meanings. And dukkha, it was the word that was translated to suffering. But Pali is a conceptual language and English is a literal one. So English had to trans dukkha as suffering because that was the first translation. But it's the same thing with all the languages. There's nuance. I forget the words, but in France there's a word that means like 7 things. And my son recently came to me and he said a French sentence to me, and it was like saying the same word over and over and over again. And he translated it, and I was like, how did it get to that? How would they understand? But they would. They just understood, right? It's languages have nuance. And then you have people who are like trying to prove a point, so you get into the Nicene Council and you get the simple changes from whatever you ask in God's name is granted to whatever you ask in my name is granted. So it takes it out of God and puts it into believing in the external man of Jesus, not Jeshua, Jesus, right? So they're putting it into this. They're infusing their own belief into it, and then you keep going up and you keep seeing alterations and changes, and it comes to the Nicene Council, and they trimmed between 40 and 60 books out of the actual text that they had, right? And I one time asked an evangelical, are the books that were trimmed out less holy than the ones that have been kept in, or less valid? He says, well, I have to believe they're not valid because they were trimmed out. I said, why? He says, well, I have to believe that God's hand was involved. You have to believe that? You have to believe that? So even the decisions that are being made about your Bible are being made by man, who has to make a decision that it's divine. So you see how this gets changed throughout history. People are constantly trying to say this and that and the other thing. We know that Bible theologians believe Matthew, Mark, and Luke all came from a single source, that they weren't individually written gospels. They were written from a single source and created to be a single source. And they don't believe that the disciples actually wrote them, right? And when you look at that idea that they're creating this history, right? Right now we live in 2023. Do you know that's the wrong date according to the birth of Jeshua? According to the Bible itself, he would have been born 6 or 8 years earlier at a minimum, because he was born in a different emperor's time, according to the Bible, and that emperor was dead before our date was given. 2023 is based upon a medieval monk who started creating a calendar, and he decided that's when Jeshua was born. He decided that was the year he was born. All of your traditions, your holidays, have been placed around pagan holidays to match pagan beliefs, which made it really easy for Romans to transition to Christianity. But we know just by looking what's in the Bible, what was in bloom, and what the stars in the sky, that he probably was born in August or September. In their stories. Do I believe in a virgin birth? I don't, because virgin births are found really in mainly pagan belief. The Romans and the Greeks had the virgin birth. The Egyptians, Horus was a virgin birth. Plato was a virgin birth. And there's story after story of virgin births in paganism. But it doesn't really come up anywhere else. It comes up only in paganism and in the New Age, the New Testament Christianity. So the Bible is filled with people's agendas, people's translations, people's misinterpretations, people's editing, people's choices of what they want people to believe. And it really comes down to using your personal discernment when you read the Bible to what does it mean? And is this loving or is this not? Because if it is loving, then it can't harm anybody. If it is hateful or harmful or fearful, then it's damaging. And to bring it down to the most simple element, you want to create a world where people love one another. There is no struggle. There is no fight. There is no fear, right? As I said, Buddha said the secret to enlightenment is the eradication of fear. And it really comes down to us realizing that when we read the Bible, take the parts that are loving and then go read the Quran and take the parts that are loving and then read the writings of Buddha and take the parts that are loving and the Bhagavad Gita. Take the parts that are loving. Watch Star Wars and get beautiful things out of Yoda, right? Shakespeare. Take the things that are loving. Take the things that have meaning to you, that are loving, and follow that. Because God is too big and too simple to be encompassed by one religion. God is too big and too simple to just be held in by a set of dogmatic beliefs by one religion. And Christianity is creating a cage of belief. And anything outside of that cage is wrong and evil. And when you look at that, it's really interesting because if in Christianity, you must take Jesus as your Savior or Messiah or you're going to burn in hell. That's their belief. But we also know the translation of the word Gehenna, which is the word that was used to describe hell in the original texts. And Gehenna was a trash dump that burned outside of Jerusalem. So people would burn their trash in Gehenna. So all the bad things burned in Gehenna. So even the translation of hell and all that, none of that happened until Dante wrote his Inferno in the Middle Ages. So the majority of Christianity that we follow nowadays is not from 2,000 years ago. It's from 1,000 years ago, or 1,200 years ago. It's not from 2,000 years ago. It's from the Middle Ages. What else happened in the Middle Ages? The Crusades. The Christians went and wiped out the Middle East and Jerusalem, right? Killed a bunch of people. What happened in the 1500s? The Spanish Inquisition wreaked havoc across Europe and the world because they were literally saying, you're not Christian. Look at South and Central America, where the conquistadors came down there and wiped out entire civilizations and tried to convert everyone to Christianity. And 15 years ago or 10 years ago, Pope Francis apologized to South and Central America for what the Christians did back then, what the conquistadors did. We have to realize, is it loving? Was it loving? You can't limit yourself to just Christianity. You have to look at God being love and love being found everywhere. And when you look at love in that way, you go out in the world and you realize that probably the majority of the people that you will see in a day, well, definitely the majority of the people you see in a day don't go to church on Sunday. The majority of the people that you will bump into in your life really are probably not Christians, even though many of them claim to be. They don't follow what you're supposed to do to be a Christian. And I remember going to my aunt's funeral and sitting there, and every time I would go back to a Catholic church, I would take communion. And I remember sitting down in that Catholic church at my aunt's funeral, and the priest saying, at this time I'd like to offer all practicing Catholics communion. And I'd like to offer all of you communion, but I can't because you must be committed to Catholicism. And that was the first day that I did not take communion in a Catholic church, because there's no way at all that my buddy Joshua back here would have ever said that. He didn't care what your faith was. He just loved you. He just loved you. And so we talk about what the Bible is. The Bible is agendas, misinterpretations, translations, and editing. But there is some truth in there. But it really takes you and your discernment to find it. You guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. See ya. Bye.
Thank you so much for watching. The John of New channel is solely funded by your generous donations and purchases of private readings and merchandise. To help out, go to johnofnew.com or use the donation link in the description below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.